Well, it was November of 2007, and it was a cold winter in Ohio, as is often the case, and Lindy and Joe were anxiously awaiting the birth of their firstborn son, Elijah, who is sitting on the back row this morning. Another anxious party was my wife, Carrie, because just a few days after the baby was to be born, the Beard family was scheduled to head west and to drop our kids off at Granny and Papa's house while Carrie and I made our annual pilgrimage to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City to watch the Chiefs play. We were really excited for this trip, but Carrie really wanted to be there when her sister went into labor, and being that it was her first time to have a baby, Lindy really wanted to have Carrie there with her as well. And things looked good at the beginning of the month, and even the week before the due date, Lindy assured Carrie that she was right on schedule. And the doctor had even said something about inducing if Elijah didn't arrive promptly on schedule. But the due date came and went. And the promise of inducing from the doctor proved to be an empty promise. And so we left Ohio and we headed for Oklahoma with my uncooperative nephew remaining firmly placed and planted in his mama's tummy. Carrie cried that day that we left town because she knew there was no way the birth would wait while we were gone on a several days trip. And sure enough, the next day, Elijah decided that it was time to be born. Well, our trip came to an end and it was time to head back to Ohio. And at this point, all the sadness about missing the birth was replaced with the excitement of seeing Elijah for the first time. And of course, we've seen pictures over email. This was back before the day where camera phones were really a big deal. And so, we saw some over email, a couple over phone, but Carrie and the kids in particular couldn't wait to see and hold this new nephew, this bundle of joy. It was a long trip back, and getting to Joe and Lindy's house was our number one priority, and the closer we got, the more the excitement built. And we drove straight to Joe and Lindy's house, and when we arrived, Joe was still at work, and Elijah was asleep in the nursery. And so we gave Lindy hugs and congratulations, and she went to go get the newest member of the family so that we could finally meet him. The anticipation built even higher, but that anticipation, it suddenly popped like an overinflated balloon. Now let me preface this by saying that I don't mean to make light of physical deformities. Just keep that in mind. But as Lindy came around the corner holding Elijah, I was quite shocked because this poor nephew of mine was born with what appeared to be an extra head protruding out of his skull. Now, I kept my mouth shut because Lindy didn't say anything, and I thought perhaps that she had said something to Carrie and that Carrie had just forgotten to warn me. And Carrie was making the normal oohs and ahs that you ladies like to make when you hold a new baby, and so I just kept my horror to myself. But then Lindy left the room for a moment, and my wife, with huge eyes about the size of coffee cups, looked at me and mouthed the words, "What in the world is wrong with his head?" Well, now I don't know what to feel. I feel a little bad that I was so shocked by this second head on my nephew. I mean, certainly I would love a two-headed nephew as much as I would love a single-headed nephew. And I also felt a little bit of anger because seriously, Lindy, you need to warn me about something like that. Give us a little bit of a heads up, no pun intended. And then I felt a little compassion because perhaps Lindy just thought her newborn baby was so beautiful that she didn't notice, or maybe she was coping with it by pretending it wasn't there. But as Lindy walked into the room, we were all kind of on pins and needles. My son Nate, who was actually about 9 years old at the time, uttered the unthinkable sentence when he said, "Dude, what is up with his head?" Well, it turns out that the second head sticking from Elijah's skull was a fairly common hematoma. And when Elijah was born, the doctor told Lindy and Joe that it was nothing to worry about and it would be gone after a couple of weeks. And when they heard that news, they didn't think much more about it and didn't think to tell us. And so, since it was cold in Ohio, all the pictures we had seen were Elijah wearing a stocking cap to keep his little head, or little heads as it was, warm. And so while it was something that Lindy was used to, it was something she didn't give much thought to us it was kind of a shock. I had a similar experience a few years ago when I rediscovered today's passage that we're going to look at. Have you ever rediscovered a passage? I'm sure you have, right? Where maybe you've read a passage over and over and over again. You've heard it 1,000 times growing up, or maybe just as you read it, and then all of a sudden you read it and it strikes you in a completely different way or in a shocking way. It hits you differently. Well, today we're making a bit of a shift in our Unlimited series. The first few weeks of this series, we were focusing on some of the misunderstandings that we have about God and the gifts He has for us. And today we're going to shift to some of the misunderstandings that we have about ourselves, which can be remedied through understanding the love of God. And today, I've been tasked with talking about the concept of unlimited connections. You see, as Mike talked about last week, God has placed people in our lives that are meant to sustain and refresh us. And what if I told you that as Christ followers, that we have access to unlimited connections that can meet all of our needs? This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs on the screen. Maybe you've heard this before. There's a kind of a hierarchy where it starts out, you need physical food, you need water, you need rest. And then the next need after you accomplish that, or that need is met, is this need of safety or security. And then once that is realized, then you have this need of love and belonging, of intimate relationship and friends. And then as it goes up further up the pyramid, you need a feeling of accomplishment, this esteem. And then, of course, the ultimate need is self-actualization, in which we realize our full potential as a human being. And I'm telling you today that through what God has given us in our unlimited connections, that we can have every one of those needs met. Sounds pretty good, huh? Well, it is actually true. But to take advantage of those unlimited connections, we first must have an accurate view of who we are and what God expects from us. Which brings us to that shocking rediscovered passage. You see, I think one of the best ways to understand those unlimited connections and their potential is to examine the one another passages in the Bible. If you go to the New Testament, there's a lot of passages that talk about one another. In fact, there are at least 41 verses in the New Testament that involve imperatives about how we should treat one another. There are commands of how we're to interact with one another. And so a few years ago, I did my first real big study on the one another's, if you will, and I wrote all of them down. I listed them down on a piece of paper, and when I first saw today's passage, I looked at it sort of how Lindy looked at her two-headed son. I'd read it before, and I kind of dismissed it and pretty much forgot about it. The one another phrase I'm talking about is this one on the screen: greet one another with a holy kiss. Now, I knew about this verse, and I even jokingly used it in high school to try to get the cute girls in youth group to give me a kiss, or maybe at least to get a laugh out of them. But I'd read it and sort of dismissed it because it appears in the conclusion to letters from the apostles of different groups of believers. I kind of looked at it and thought, oh, maybe it's just like, sincerely, Paul. Greet one another with a holy kiss. But as I studied that phrase and as I studied the passage more deeply, I suddenly looked at this verse with a bit of shock. Because I discovered that there are a lot of one another's. I said over 41 verses of one another. Can anybody guess what the number one most occurring one another command is? Love. Can anybody tell me what the number two command is? What's that? One more time, I can't hear you. Love your neighbor, but as far as like the one another's, we have love one another, then something else one another. What is the number two, you think? Greet one another. It actually is. It's not bear with one another. We see that one. It's not build one another up. It's not that one. It's not forgive one another. We see that one. It's not accept one another. We see that one. But the number two most occurring passage of the one another's is greet one another with a holy kiss. That's number two. It's number two. In fact, Paul uses this phrase 4 times. You can see the 4 there. And Peter talks about it once when he says, greet one another with a kiss in love in 1 Peter 5. And Mike talked about this in his Ephesians study this morning. But, you know, I've done enough Bible study to realize that if God says it once, it's important. If God says it a couple of times, you better take note. If he says it multiple times, you really better pay attention. And so we're going to look today at the one in 2 Corinthians 13:12. And I believe that this proper understanding of this passage will not only help us understand God's intentions about understanding the concept of self in his kingdom, but it will help us to access those unlimited connections that God has provided. What Paul is communicating in this verse on the screen and in the others, and what Peter communicates in 1 Peter 5, is what we call an imperative. It is more or less a command, a statement that is made with action expected in return. But before we learn more about this holy kiss, let's see the frame in which it's mentioned. First of all, we have this word greet. Of course, we think of greeting as a wave or saying hello, and certainly that's part of it, but this goes a little deeper. The Greek word literally means welcome here. And so Paul is talking about more than just a simple head nod as you pass in the hallway. He's talking about an action of interaction. He's talking about how we should interact with one another in a welcoming fashion. And then there's this phrase, one another. And each verse that mentions the holy kiss or the kiss of love is part of a letter that was written to a church. And the way this would be communicated in that letter is it would be written to a specific church, in this case, the church in Corinth, and then the letter would be read aloud at a worship assembly, much like this. Then the letter would be passed around to other congregations, if appropriate, to be read aloud so that they could too learn the apostles' instructions. And so simply put, what this tells us is that the one another in this passage is believers, and specifically the community of faith, the body of believers who are the church. So, therefore, this holy kiss that we are talking about today is the way that the community of faith, that's us, should engage in the action of interaction. So, then the question is, what is a holy kiss and how does it apply to our lives today? Well, I think maybe on the surface, if you're like me, maybe you've reduced this to a fleeting social interaction. I used to think that we kind of had this covered when we interact with one another before and after the service. You know, when you walked in, I saw many of you greet one another. I saw you shake hands. I saw you give hugs, and some of that's going to take place after the service too. That's our greeting time, the before and after the service. And I kind of felt like was covered, right? That's covered. This verse is covered in that action. You know, that culture greeted each other with a kiss. That's it, in Paul's culture. Like some cultures still do today. You see them do a kiss on each side of the cheek or whatever the case may be. And we, in our culture, we do it more so with a handshake or maybe a fist bump or maybe, if it's a more intimate connection, a hug. But I've changed my mind. I don't think that is actually what this is talking about. I think that because it is mentioned multiple times, and because Paul calls it the holy kiss, we can be sure that this is more than just a fleeting physical act of greeting. I think when we look at what the kiss meant in the culture of that time, we combine it with what God expected out of his people, the church, that we find some ingredients that should be characteristics of our action of interaction today. And when we exchange our typical tendencies for the characteristics of this holy kiss, we'll better understand God's intention of the concept of self and better experience then the unlimited connections as God has intended. So knowing that, as we talk about the holy kiss, there's a few things we must exchange. Number one, we must exchange isolation for familiarity. Now, we've talked about the concept of isolation before. You know that most of us can live in a neighborhood, and you can wake up in the morning and you can get in your car and you can open the garage door and you can pull your car out of the garage and you can drive to your job and you can go to the parking garage and you can go in, and then when you're done with your job, you get back in your car, drive back to your neighborhood, maybe wave at the neighbor as you go past, and you get back in your car, close the garage door, and never have to interact with anybody unless you do so at work. That's kind of how we have this isolation. Even though we're in the midst of people, we have a tendency to do that. We interact. Or maybe we leave the house, but we never interact. Or maybe we interact, but we never actually connect. I have a lot of friends on Facebook, like 780-something, I think, because I just accept whoever requests it, even those princes from Nigeria that are offering me money. But the point is that I can have all kinds of friends, not only on Facebook, but in real life, and never actually make a true connection because we choose to be isolated. I mentioned before that we often equate this kiss with a handshake or a cultural form of greeting, and I want to test that right now. And let's see here. I think, well, since you guys, Lainey and Adam, would just come on up here front for a second. Could you give them a round of applause for not having any choice but to do this? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to test. You can face the crowd there. I want to test this concept today. And so first of all, I want you to turn to each other, and I want you to wave at each other. Very good. They're good, right? They got it going. Okay. Now I want you to greet each other with a fist bump. Go ahead and do that. Okay, very good. And now I'd like for you to give a high five. That's a pretty good greeting. Okay, very good. Now shake hands. It's more formal, more proper. Okay, very good. And now I want you to give Adam a huge kiss on the mouth. Go ahead and do that right now. Okay, you guys can be seated. Give him a round of applause. Now, I didn't know who I was going to bring up, but I did consider the fact, what if they actually did it? That would be. But the point of that is that this is more, the kiss is more than just a cultural greeting, right? It's more than that. That myth is debunked because obviously that would have been weird to do. It would seem different. It would just be something completely outside the cultural norm. Now, certainly, again, there is a cultural issue there. If those two grew up in a different part of the world, they may be more comfortable with greeting with a kiss. But the truth is that a kiss is very different than a handshake because it requires an amount of familiarity. It requires us to let our guard down and to let someone inside our personal space. It requires us to intersect our bubbles. We know what our bubbles are, right? In fact, some of you are annoyed because somebody's intersecting your bubble right now. Keep your arm on your side of the chair. That's why the chairs are divided. We don't have pews anymore because people were tired of bubbles being interacted, right? That's kind of how it works, is that we have our personal space, and if I walk up to you and got really close, if you ever watched Seinfeld, it's what they called the close talker, right? Those people drive me nuts, and I'm sure they drive you nuts too. We got to get in those bubbles, and it's uncomfortable. And a holy kiss requires a complete smashing of bubbles. A complete smashing of those bubbles in personal space. Yes, a kiss would have been more socially acceptable as a greeting in Paul's time, but I believe that one of the reasons Paul gives this imperative statement, this command to the churches, is because the kiss would be a representation of how God intended for the lives of his people to intersect. That it was a small picture of what life should be for us. Church, I believe way too often that we have our personal bubbles and we carry them with us everywhere, including in our relationships with one another. And that will keep us from experiencing what God has intended. God has intended for us to be familiar with one another, to let our guard down, and to let someone else invade our lives, if you will. And being a part of the church requires us to intersect our lives. And it's true, just as true now as it was then when Paul wrote this command. It takes a relationship that goes beyond the surface to make a holy kiss possible. You know the root word for familiarity, you know what it is. It's family. And as Mike communicated last week, that's exactly the kind of relationship God intended for us to have between one another. Galatians 3 says this. It says, "You are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus, for all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." In other words, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, if you are in Christ, you are sons or daughters of God. And if we are all sons or daughters of God, you know what that makes us? Siblings. It makes us family. And so our action of interaction should show that familiarity of family. Second, we must exchange the counterfeit for the genuine. When my father died, he didn't have a whole lot of money or any kind of thing for inheritance, but one of the most prized possessions that he had were a bunch of musical instruments. And so the day after, or the day of the funeral, we went home to Mom and Dad's farm, and we went and looked at Dad's instruments, and we got to go through those and select some of those for the kids and the grandkids to keep with them because it was a prized possession. And my son Nathan, who lived with Mom and Dad, my granny and Papa, for a year, and to help them out as he went through his first year of college, he learned to play the fiddle. And so it was just natural for Nate to choose this fiddle. Now, and as Adam and I were talking about, this is a fiddle. It's not a violin, because my dad never played the violin. He always played the fiddle. And so Nate chose this fiddle, and then he went off to school at Knoxville. And one day I got a phone call, or I was talking to Nate on the phone. He said, "Dad, I was looking at that fiddle, and I was looking inside it, and you're not going to believe what I found. I found a label inside it, and it looked kind of like this. It's a label with the word Stradivarius and the date 1736. Can you imagine if this violin or this fiddle was that old? And so I thought, yeah, well, it's a possibility. I mean, Dad didn't know what he had a lot of times, and so he could have had a fiddle or a violin that was old and that sort of thing. And so I did a little research and found out the Stradivarius violin, there are some that have been found in different places, and if you find one, they're worth in the millions of dollars. Now, I also found out that this is a potentially big deal, but and I realized, by the way, that if that was the case, if it was worth millions of dollars, we had to stop calling it a fiddle. It had to be it was a violin then, for sure. But Nathan told me he was going to take it to a music shop and to get it checked out, and I encouraged him to do so, but I warned him. I warned him that it probably wasn't worth millions of dollars for a couple of reasons. First of all, my dad was cheap. And he didn't have millions of dollars, let alone he didn't ever buy instruments that were of really high quality for the most part. There were 2 or 3 instruments that he had that were of high quality, but for the most part, he bought cheap instruments. And second of all, those $1 million violins handcrafted by Antonius Stradivari have been copied by millions of instrument makers. And they put those little stamps inside them with the date and with the name, and they're usually worth a little less than $1 million, typically even less than $100, typically. And so Nate took it to the store, and we found out that it is a true Stradivarius, and it's worth millions of dollars, and that's why I have it here with me. Just, no, it was not worth anything. It was a counterfeit, just as you might have guessed. We are not millionaires. Quite frankly, this is the hardest thing we have to overcome in our action of interaction. That we live in a society where our interaction is generally not sincere. I mean, I really knew. I thought maybe it'd be cool. I mean, no, it'd really be cool if it was worth millions of dollars. But I knew, I was 99.999% sure that violin was a fake. And I think that we look around and we say, oh, it'd be really cool if our interaction was genuine. But 99.999% of the time, isn't our interaction with one another maybe just a little fake? Like the common knowledge that most Stradivarius violins are not genuine, it's pretty common knowledge that a bulk of our interaction is not usually genuine. We are nice people. We sure are a nice people. We love giving nice drive-by greetings. You've heard me complain about this before. We say things like, hi, how are you? We say, good to see you. Or, how's it going? And we really respond with things like, I'm fine, thanks for asking. But let's be honest. If you're anything like me, when I ask you, how are you doing, I don't really care. And I don't really want to know. If I see you in Walmart and say, how are you doing? If you're having a really bad week and start going in this long diatribe of how bad your week is, I'm just there to get milk and bread. Leave me alone. I'm just trying to greet you. Now, there's a little bit of hyperbole there. I do care I do care about others. But typically that kind of interaction, there is not a genuine amount of care in there. We don't really want to know. But the holy kiss, now, that was different. The holy kiss required sincerity. Look at what Peter says in 1 Peter 1. Now that you've purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so you have sincere love for your brothers, love one another deeply from the heart. Peter says here that there's a direct result and requirement of the salvation given to us through faith in Jesus, is that we have love for our brothers, and those are our fellow believers. And the love we have for one another, it must be sincere, it must be deep, it must be from the heart. You see, anybody can put on a mask and look like something they are not. And when we interact with one another, we can put on the polite mask and look and play nice. But when our love is only superficial like that, we may have the kiss part down, but we certainly don't have the holy part down. This is a tough thing, by the way. Because sometimes it's not a matter of me not caring. It's about me not wanting to let you know how I really am. It's about keeping that mask on and say, I've got a perfect life and I'm fine. Remember, though, it's not just the kiss part. It's the holy part, because Judas, as you recall, betrayed Jesus with a kiss. And just because he sugarcoated it didn't mean that it wasn't betrayal. And insincerity may not keep us from looking the part, but our hypocrisy certainly keeps us and our interaction from being holy. We must take off the masks of superficiality and love one another deeply and sincerely. And so our action of interaction must be sincere. But finally, we must exchange individualism for unity. This call for unity was clear in the command of the holy kiss. First of all, without exception, every letter that included the command of the holy kiss or the kiss of love also included some kind of instruction about unity, that the church should be unified. And an important part of unity is not always, but most of the time, an important part of unity is to be together. Have you ever tried to do a three-legged race with someone at a picnic or something? The key to that is you've got one leg tied together, and the way that it works, if you're going to win that race, is those legs need to move together. They need to be unified in their direction. They need to be unified in their speed. But the key to that is they have to be together to do that. But if you dig into the cultural context of the time of Paul, we find that the kiss that Paul and Peter write about, they had connotations, as I said before, beyond just a simple greeting. We see that the kiss signified things that would actually reinforce and exhibit the unity that God desires from His church. First of all, it signified acceptance. In the Greco-Roman society of the time, when someone would join a club or a group, the official seal of acceptance would be, and approval into that group would be a kiss. And it would show that the person had met all the criteria to enter that group. Of course, in the case of the holy kiss, we accept people based on the criteria that God has set. Quite simply, the faith of Jesus in Jesus Christ. Romans 15:7 says, accept one another then, just as Christ has accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. And this is a whole other sermon, by the way, but how did Christ accept us? I don't know about you, but Christ accepted me without condition when I was dead in my sin. He didn't say, I want you to get cleaned up and get perfect and obey every command before you come to me. He didn't say, I have some things I want you to do before you come to me. He didn't say, whenever you can guarantee to me that you will not mess up again, I want you to come to me. He said, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's how we should accept one another, and this kind of acceptance builds unity. But the kiss also signified reconciliation. When two parties would be in dispute, once they settled their disputes, they would kiss to show an end of their dispute and their division. We see a couple of examples of this in the Old Testament. Jacob and Esau kissed after they resolved their differences in Genesis 33. Joseph and his brothers, after they sold him into slavery, they were reconnected and reconciled in Genesis 45 and signified that with a kiss. Paul talks about how this works in the church in Colossians 3. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And so when two believers would exchange the holy kiss, it would be a reflection of the forgiveness that they had in their heart for one another. The kiss would show the unity that now existed between them. And of course, Paul says that we should forgive as the Lord forgave us. And how did God forgive you? I don't know about you, but the forgiveness that I got, I didn't deserve. And the forgiveness of debt that I got, I could never pay back. See, Augustine said of the early Christians, they demonstrated their inward peace by an outward kiss. And Cyril of Jerusalem said, this kiss is a sign that our souls are united and we banish all remembrance of injury. I like that. So this is how we should forgive one another. Unity is built on this kind of forgiveness. But finally, the kiss also signified solidarity. The kiss in that society was an expression of mutual love and solidarity. This is a big deal because the early church was full of diverse people that were defined in society by very clear social and economic values. They were in their places. They were in their labels. And there were those boundaries that existed in that time that would be equal to some of the worst racial boundaries in our own country's history. And Paul and Peter told these people to show their solidarity with a holy kiss. Can you imagine? In our worst of times as a country, two groups that hated each other coming together and sharing a kiss. And that holy kiss would show that regardless of where they came from, that we were all in this together. They were unified as one body. You see, Peter and Paul told the early churches that the action of their interaction should be the holy kiss because it did reflect the attitude that they should have in their heart as a body of believers. Attitudes about the concept of self and attitudes about the action of interaction. That as believers, we should not be isolated, but rather develop familiarity with other believers so that our relationship reflects that connection as a family. That our lives with one another are not superficial or hypocritical, but that our love for one another is deep and sincere. And that life is not about individualism and what we can do by ourselves, but about what we can do through unity within the church that is maintained and supported by our acceptance of one another, by our reconciliation with one another, and with our solidarity with one another. And each of these realities is made possible because of Christ and what he did on the cross for our sins. Church, the unlimited connection that we are offered through Christ enables us to have the unlimited connection with other people that will meet our needs if we only engage with familiarity, sincerity, and unity. And here's how that works. I'm going to do a little activity to close this morning. Everybody stand up. Go ahead and stand up where you are. We're going to play 2 games. And I promise if you play these games, you'll end up with chocolate by the end of the day, okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do. Oh, by the way, this is our symbol for our today, a kiss, okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do. Quick game. Now, the goal of this game, game number 1, the goal of this game is for you to get a Hershey's Kiss. Now, before the service today, we can't tell you who, but some of you were given a Hershey's Kiss. And so the goal of this game, and you have 1 minute, is to everybody that can, I want you to get a Hershey's Kiss. Are you ready? Everybody understand? Okay, by the way, one rule, you can only have 1 Hershey's Kiss at a time during these games, okay? So you can't hoard the kisses, 1 at a time. So when I count to 3, I want you to mingle up and mix up, and I want you to, the goal again is to get a Hershey's Kiss. Like I said, some of you already have them, and if you don't have them, you got to figure out who has them, and you got to figure out how to get it from them, okay? 1, 2, 3, go. Now remember, you want to have a Hershey's Kiss, and you do not have to give it to anybody. You're game number 2, so. You do not have to give up a Hershey's Kiss. You do not have to give it up. All right, time's up. Everybody stop. Everybody stop and just turn around. Just stay where you are. Turn around. Hold on a second. Okay, everybody stop. Shh. Okay, here we go. Now, let me ask a question. Who started with a Hershey's Kiss? Who ended with a Hershey's Kiss? So most of you that started with one ended with one, right? Okay. How many of you tried to get one but couldn't get one? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you tried to get one and did get one? How did you do that? You broke the rules twice. Okay. All right. Now, hold on now. Now, again, if we were playing, it's a Hershey's Kiss. But if the goal of the game is to get a Hershey's Kiss and have a Hershey's Kiss, probably, if you had one, you shouldn't give it up, right? Okay? Okay? Now, new game. All right, number 2, this game. This time, the goal is to give away a Hershey's Kiss. But everyone, again, Gary, is only allowed 1 Hershey's Kiss at a time. Okay? Go ahead and spread out, crew. Okay, ready? On the count of 3, the goal is to give 1. 1, 2, 3, go. Here you go. All right, time is up. Go ahead and have a seat. Go ahead and have a seat for a moment here. Now, let me ask you this question. How many of you end up with a Hershey's Kiss? Raise your hand. All right, everybody, good. If you didn't want, we'll get you one. I can promise you that. Now, let's talk about this for just a moment as we close here. Go ahead and have a seat for just a moment. You see, the way we do life oftentimes is that we try to get the things that we need. And when everybody's trying to get what we need, then it really makes us selfish and we hold on, and what happens is that we don't really have those needs met. Maybe a few of us do, and we find it and we take hold of it and we hold on to it tight. But you know, game number 2, that is what a picture of unlimited connections looks like within the body of believers. That when our goal is to give, then we give it to someone else, and Lainey and Nathan were walking around with an virtually unlimited supply. They played the role of God in this picture. Because God, once we give our love, once we give help to meet the needs of someone else, the more we give, the more God gives to us. And the more we give, it just is an endless cycle. And pretty soon, if everybody in this body of believers starts giving, and that's our number one goal, and we don't look at number 1 is the most important thing, and it's the most important for me to have my needs met. It's important for me to meet your needs. Guess what? All of a sudden, somebody's going to come around. They're going to meet my needs too. That is the way the economy of God works. That's the way that the holy kiss should work. So you may ask, okay, what does the holy kiss have to do with this? Well, you may be disappointed or you may be delighted to hear that I'm not advocating the reinstatement of the holy kiss as prescribed by Paul and Peter. I simply don't think we have a custom today that is perfectly parallel to the gravity of the holy kiss. But I'm also not advocating business as usual. I think we need to examine our hearts and allow God to break them and rebuild them. We need God to transform us from the inside out and give us the familiarity and the sincerity and the unity with one another that will bring glory to His name, that is represented by this teaching of the holy kiss. I believe it starts on the inside, and when we align our attitudes with the attitude and ingredients of the holy kiss, I believe we will begin to express our love for one another more freely, and then we can experience the unlimited connections as God has intended. Will you stand and pray with me today? God, we do thank you for the intimacy, the familiarity, the sincerity, the generosity that you've shown to us. Then, Lord, I pray you'll help us to reject the system of the world that says I need to get whatever I can. I'm the most important person in my life. And help us to replace that with an attitude of giving and sharing. That our goal will be to give and meet the needs of others. And when that's done correctly, with the same type of interaction that was prescribed by the holy kiss, that we will meet the needs of one another, and that our needs will even be met beyond our own imagination, because we are consistently and constantly giving of others. So be with us, God. Break our hearts, change them, align them with yours. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.